Resurrection of Evil is the expansion pack for Doom 3 and follows another unnamed protagonist as they discover the Heart of Hell. The game is available on PC and Xbox consoles. Atmosphere. The most prominent feature of the game is the sharp ramp up in difficulty compared with the same setting on base Doom 3. Many more enemies spawn in and a lot of them do more damage. The ammo is scarce, as is healing items, and it makes the combat a lot more intense and frankly stressful. But for me, sometimes it bordered on frustrating. The game also uses the original flashlight mechanic, and with the increased difficulty there were many points where it filled me with dread to think I'd have to put my gun away to get the flashlight out to see where I was going in the absolute darkness. The same lighting transforms the sterile corridors into hiding spots for enemies, and its moody presence along with the impressive sound design make walking the hallways of the Mars base similar but more intense than the base game. That's one Harry Mason. Scares. Just like the base game, Resurrection of Evil scares are mostly down to the combat, and it tries harder to surprise the player with random spawning enemies, and whilst this is more intense than it was in Doom 3, it again gets tiring after several areas. It uses some scripted events, with the most prominent one being the giant block moving a few inches down as I passed under it, making me think it was going to fall on me. This happened right at the start and made me optimistic that the game was going to continue along this path, but there weren't really any other moments like that, which was pretty disappointing. The game introduces new mechanics, weapons, and enemies, and most of them don't really contribute anything to the horror, but there is the Lost Souls that can scare you randomly when they attack you from behind, shaking the game camera. There's also the artifact that shakes the player's hand and has a really creepy animation. This is about it for the scares though. There were less frightening moments than the original game, sadly, but the combat itself was more intense and had more surprises. But it doesn't really compensate for the general lack in scares. That's still one Harry Mason. Sound design. The sound design seems somehow improved over the BFG edition, with less smaller problems that come at the cost of just having less music. There were far less mixing problems in Resurrection of Evil, and it was much easier to hear voices over the gunfire. The voice acting was kind of unremarkable, and some of the voices for the soldiers and scientists seemed sort of cheesy. Betruger makes a return and is the most lively character of the very small group of voiced characters.
Hell reaches out for what is ours. We have been unbound. They have arrived, my children. As I promised.
The sound effects of the guns were the same as before, with the addition of the super shotgun, which sounds glorious. The directional audio was more functional, and that's always a nice thing. Overall, there were a couple of concessions, but the sound design still hits the mark. That's 2 Harry Masons. Gore. Resurrection of Evil still has a lot of the same blood-stained corridors that were present in Doom 3, and its hellish aspects are fun to behold. And since one of the new mechanics involves using an alien heart to absorb the bodies of the dead for its power, there are far more bodies laying around the base than there were in Doom 3. But the actual effect used for absorbing them was rather tame and a bit disappointing. Blasting zombies with the shotgun and now the super shotgun is just as entertaining as it was in the base game. Even though it's missing the gory cutscenes that Doom 3 had, Resurrection of Evil has minor improvements on the base game's gore. That's 3 Harry Masons. story. Resurrection of Evil begins with another unnamed Marine arriving on the Mars base over a year after the events of Doom 3, and with his squad, unearths an ancient Martian artifact. Upon touching it, he vaporizes his squad but gains control over the artifact. Upon realizing this heart of hell is now awoken, Betruger sends more hell demons through a portal to Mars. The game follows a similar plot as Doom 3 with addition of extra characters to guide the Marine through the levels. There's less cutscenes and the game focuses more on the gameplay.
Dr. McNeil, our assumptions were correct. The artifact is a weapon of unbelievable power.
Again, the game contains a lot of diary entries and video discs to watch and read, but they didn't add a lot to the story from the select few that I bothered to stop to read. There are less of these in the main game, but still quite a few to sift through. Unlike Doom 3, which felt like there was a lot of padding, Resurrection of Evil is trimmed and varied enough, and the gameplay is intense enough to leave the story behind and still enjoy what you're doing. The lack of story didn't seem to harm the experience at the end of the day, making the final score 4 out of 5 Harry Masons. Resurrection of Evil cranks up the intensity but leaves a few things behind. It's got a lot of content that should have been in the main game, and whilst it has a lot of interesting ideas, it never really cements itself as a horror game just like the main game. Again, I'd like to remind you, the whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games. If you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I sent the demons back to hell, I did not scream like a banshee or run away with the computer and advise you don't either. There will be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. And always go check out Bumps in the middle of the night. Peace.